We are back in session,
Can't make it look too
and we're
nice.
going to deal with the, is it properly titled the Retiree Benefit Review or OPED, or what are they the same subject?
Actually, they're not the same subject. The retiree benefit review is a really specific action you need to take with regard to the pension COLA. But as a follow-up to Monday, you said that you wanted to have a brief discussion about OPEB and what it means to you and the funding. So if that's what you'd like, I can give you a 5 or 10 minute overview of what we're talking about, and then you can discuss how you'd
Okay,
like
we'll
to
get
fold
you
that
your
into the
first
budget.
subject first, then, whatever we,
Okay. So you want the agenda subject or the OPEB subject?
agenda, if you can do it first.
Okay, we can. I think on Monday I gave you a copy of a letter speaking of the General Employee Pension Plan cost of living adjustment in accordance with the city code as part of the annual budget review process, and it's a letter that should look like that. You, the council, are to review the optional cost of living adjustment that can be applied at your discretion to employees in the plan who retired prior to October 1, 1998. Anyone who retired after October the 1st, 1998 will receive an automatic 1% cost of living adjustment increase in their pension benefit for the coming year. Anyone who retired before that date, it's your discretion as to whether they receive the 1% or any level of cost of living adjustment. Just as, to get the numbers in perspective, one of the things you're supposed to consider is the Consumer Price Index. Actually, May to May, 2014 to 2015, that happens to be 0. However, the other thing to consider is that the Social Security Administration cost of living adjustment for Social Security benefits for this year is 1.7%. Right now, there are 254 employees who will receive the automatic 1% increase, and that'll increase your benefits payments in the coming year by about $46,000. And again, none of this affects your budget per se. This is entirely out of the pension fund. There are 100 employees in the plan who did retire prior to October 1st, 1998. If you were to grant a discretionary 1% cost of living adjustment for those employees, it would increase your total annual benefits paid by about $14,000. And last year, that group of employees did receive a 1% cost of living increase. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Otherwise, your action is to vote what you would consider to be the appropriate discretionary cost of living adjustment for those employees.
I have trouble treating one group differently than another personally, so.
Do people normally, what's the average age of retirement? I mean, is it 64, 65?
Wow.
I'm just thinking this is 18 years ago. I mean, these people are over 80 years old.
There are still 100 employees in the plan that retired before
What's wrong
that
with
date.
being 80?
There's nothing wrong with being 80. I just, I have a hard time treating people over 80 poorly.
Yeah.
$14,000 is
And
not,
that's the thing, $14,000 and 100 people benefit. It's
that's pretty good.
decent thing for your
Yeah. I would have no problem giving that to them.
Are we talking about annually? Are we talking
Just
about
annual.
perpetually, or are we talking about
Annually.
just
You
one
have to
year?
vote this every year, up or down.
How many employees were there last year?
Last year's amounts were, I don't know if I have last year's folder with me. I don't. Sorry, I don't have last year's folder.
I don't want to be morbid, but, that number is going to probably come down pretty quick.
I don't know. I don't have that
Okay.
one.
I think some of those ages, some people were late 80s, early 90s. I
Yeah.
remember from that worksheet that we had. So
Randy, what's your pleasure?
I would go for it.
How about you, Ms. Turner?
I would hold because the CPI index is 0.
All right, do we need a formal vote on
Need
this?
a
We do.
motion and a vote, yeah.
Is it a voice vote or a roll call? Roll call.
It's a voice vote.
A voice vote? All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Opposed?
It passes 4-1 to give them the 1%.
The discretionary 1%. Okay. So that takes care of that actual agenda item. Well, again, it's up to you. You wanted to talk about OPEB in the context of what you want to do with it in the budget, if you'd like to talk
I
about
think
that
you
now.
have to do OPED first.
Okay. So OPEB is a very misunderstood subject, and it can be very confusing. So I'm going to try really hard, I think, to maybe dial it back to the specifics for people, because there's been a lot of conversation about it. First of all, OPEB is the acronym for what are called Other Post-Employment Benefits, OPEB. And It is absolutely not pension. It has nothing to do with pension. It's a completely separate set of benefits. Pension is accounted for differently. And in our case, the only other post-employment benefit that we provide is a subsidy of retiree health insurance costs. A subsidy that's based on your years of service, which is sometimes why I guess it gets confused with pension. So in recent years, probably about 2008, we've been on what you call pay-as-you-go, which is a fancy name for every year we have a certain number of retirees on our health insurance. We know what our portion of their premium is. We budget for that, and monthly we pay the bills. About 2008 or so, GASB decided that there was a growing liability related to providing this benefit because, in GASB's opinion, when you promise that benefit, there are really two things that you're doing, and this is what really creates that liability. First of all, GASB says there's a cost associated with the explicit subsidy. In other words, if you've been here for a certain number of years, we pay 50% of your bill and you pay 50% of your bill. That's the explicit rate subsidy that, according to GASB, has a net present value that creates a bigger liability than pay-as-you-go. But a very huge portion of that multi-million-dollar liability is because GASB also says that there's an implicit rate subsidy that by allowing older retirees onto your health care plan at the same rates as younger employees, you're actually driving up your health care costs for everyone as opposed to what they would pay if they had to go out to the marketplace at their age and get get insurance benefits. And so that implicit rate subsidy actually has a number assigned to it by the actuary as well. And if you read the information the actuary provided, it's probably the substantial portion of it really drives up that liability. At one point, that total liability was $57 million. Last year, the city took an action that made a huge difference. We said if you are over 65, you are going in the future to be required to go to a Medicare supplement plan. But oh, by the way, even though we're not going to require it for existing employees, we were able to come up with a very cost-effective, about $200 a month Medicare Advantage plan that we had huge quantities of people, like 85 people that voluntarily went from the city's normal, health insurance plan to this Medicare supplement, Medicare Advantage plan, because it worked for them too. If you're paying 50% of a $400 premium and now you can pay your 50% of a $200 premium and it's a good insurance plan, you win, the city wins. By that one simple action, because of the huge change in the explicit rate subsidy, as well as the implicit rate subsidy, because now we're lining things up with what we're really paying when we go Medicare Advantage, the city's total liability, future liability for OPEB, calculated by the actuary, went from $56 million to $36 million. Okay, huge change. So we can continue to drive those costs down simply by, holding the line on health insurance costs and coming up with ways to make plans better for our retirees. However, GASB has also decided something else. Right now, we're allowed to be pay-as-you-go with no consequence to our balance sheet, except that every single year, the actuary calculates an amount called the annual required contribution that we should be paying to cover not only current costs, but future costs, very much like pension. Well, with pay-as-you-go, we just pay the bill every year. And therefore, there's a difference between the should amount and the amount we actually pay, and that has been accumulating slowly on the balance sheet as an increase in our net unfunded liability. Starting with the fiscal year ending in 17-18, what GASB is going to ask us to do, and that's the Government Accounting Standards Board, is treat OPEB just like pensions and show the entire unfunded liability on our balance sheet, okay, if we're pay-as-you-go. Now, if we have a trust, we get to show the net liability, the difference between our total liability and the amount of money we have in our trust. So that sounds great, except for even if we started a trust right now, those numbers in 2 years will be virtually the same. Because the idea behind a trust and the reason that an OPEB trust is attractive is really two things. Okay, the first one is that every year in a trust, you put in the money the actuary tells you to put in, and then you pull back out of the trust the money that you need to pay your actual bills, and you get to pull back out of the trust the money that they calculate to be your implicit rate subsidy. In other words, you get to give back to yourself the differential between what you're paying for your other employees your younger active employees, and what you should be paying, because you're allowing these retirees onto your plan. So you put money in and you take money back out to pay your costs as well as to give yourself a break on your rates that you should be getting if the retirees weren't on there. But you still have some money left in the trust. And every year that net amount gets bigger and begins to earn interest. Okay, so that's the idea. Down the road, you've got a residual amount that's now earning interest, just like a pension fund, that will help defray your costs down the road. The second reason that a trust is good is once you start putting money in, leaving a residual amount and earning money, you get to assume a different discount rate. Right now, your liability is discounted, I think it's at 4%, 3.5% or 4%. Once you actually have money that's earning money, you get to assume like 6 or 7%, a reasonable earnings rate, and it actually lowers your liability. So you have those two benefits of a trust. You're really accumulating actual money that will earn interest and help you pay the benefits, but you also get the advantage of assuming a different discount rate that lowers your theoretical actuarial liability, which will help your numbers on the balance sheet. Okay, so that's really the two. You can continue to pay as go as long as you want. And again, in the initial years, the difference between your net liability and your total unfunded liability, the only reason it'll get better is because of that better discount rate, because you've established a trust. Okay, the concern that our actuary has, and this is what we need to talk to our auditors about, is if you put your foot like on the platform, one on the platform and one on the train, and you say we're going to have a trust but we're only going to partially fund it, is that the fact that you haven't fully committed to funding that ARC, the annual required contribution, may cause the auditors to say, well, that's all great, but since you're not really doing it, you don't get to use this other discount rate.
Yeah.
You're going to have to stay with a lower discount rate until you really are funding it. So the concern of our actuary, and this needs to be really vetted with our auditors and maybe with the GFOA, is what happens when you say you have a trust but you don't really by partially funding it. Are you actually worse off on your balance sheet and on your audit? Are you going to get a negative comment about saying you're going to do something that you then only halfway do, when you're not going to get a negative comment about continuing to be pay as you go? You're just going to have to continue to show that liability. So with that, I mean, before we talk about the numbers, I'm hoping that made sense.
When do you declare you're going to do it? When you pay, or you declare it in the budget and you're going to pay sometime during that year?
You really have to have the actuary, you have to decide before the actuary does your valuation which way you want to go, because that will affect what they tell you your annual required contribution is, and that will affect your contribution. Bottom line, you can have the actuary calculate it more than once, and they've done that before. So, bottom line, I would say we have until the end of next fiscal year to decide whether we want to make that contribution and make it. Physically, cash-wise, you have until the end of the fiscal year. The problem that you have, essentially, is that if you look at the very top sheet that I showed you, this is over different amortization periods, the impact on your individual budgets. This is the real, there's actuary numbers and then there's finance numbers. So the actuary numbers talk about putting money in and then taking money back out and the implicit rate subsidy and all that. This is the net effect to your budgets. No matter how the flow of cash works, this is how much you'd be out in order to pre-fund that OPEB trust at various amortization periods and for the various funds. Okay. And the allocation is simply based on the number of retirees that retired from that fund, just like it's the same percentage allocation as the actual payments that we make now. So in the other funds, in the enterprise funds, even at the 22-year amortization period, we're not talking huge numbers, but if you look at the impact to the general fund, even at what the actuary considers to be kind of one of the longest credible amortization periods. Because, again, GASB's limit's 30 years. In other words, you can't say, I want to fund an OPEB trust over the next 175 years, and put in $20 a year. So even the 27-year mark is a pretty substantial impact on your general fund, and that's really what you're stuck with.
So it comes down to $300,000 in the general fund. The rest of these can all afford it.
Can afford it, even the marina.
Even in the marina.
$3,400, even in the marina. He doesn't have that many retarees.
But
So.
he doesn't have that many people yet.
Exactly.
He doesn't have any retirees, probably.
He has a couple. So I hope that...
Is it practical? I mean,
There's Mike, right.
just one idea. Is it practical to say that if the Dodgertown thing did happen, we could? We're using.
I'll put that one
using
to
Yeah.
Amelia.
Well, how many other things did we say we were going to maybe use Dodgertown for?
It is practical. In other words, I do think, from everything that I understand, it's not a decision that has to be made irrevocably now unless you plan to fund it with ad valorem taxes. You would have some time over the coming year to see how things went and to decide. Not too much time, because again, you have to put the money in and then bring the money back out.
Well, the reality is we're not going to get what we paid for Dodgertown. So we're going to have, even what debt service we'd pull down would be lessened, but we've learned to live with having that go out continuously. So I think we could learn to live with this going out continuously.
I'd say your only issue with Dodgertown, and I'm sure the city manager can speak to this, is by the time you get an appraisal, because we have to sell public land, put it on the market, get the sale process completed, take that money, and then get your debt service refinanced if that's what you plan to do. It's going to be past the end of this coming fiscal year, I would say.
Oh, yeah.
When can we take steps? We're free now, aren't we?
No, you're going to take your first step, and I think it requires 2 readings.
Yes.
And one of those, and this will be where we sign the agreements with the county, and you'll start on July the 21st, the next council meeting. Then the first meeting in August is when you do the second. And then we will go out, assuming that we want to sell it, we would go out and get an appraisal, and then we'd draw up what kind of, how we want to put it out for sale. And that putting it out for sale, are there restrictions that the council wants to place on that, or are we just going to sell it as a piece of ground?
Well, we've sat here for 2 days, and so far, nothing at this mark has come out of, we're at a wash.
We have
Yeah.
to go back and look, yeah.
So,
But you're dealing with the property, for myself, all those steps are fine, I'd go forward with them. Does anyone else? We want to sell it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We
we just
wanna get
can't
an appraisal.
accelerate it, I think is what they're saying. Is that we're not
That's
going to see any.
It'll be
can't
after the
budget
first
for
of the
it.
year. But after the first of the year, after we sell the property, you can come back and do a budget amendment.
and
to
that's what
fund
I'm
this.
saying. If it happens, we could do it at the 27-year mark this year. But if it doesn't happen within this fiscal year, then are we not looking at establishing it this year and
Well,
instead next year?
What I'm saying is that you wait till you sell the property, then you come back and amend your budget, because then you'll have money in hand, and we won't have 15 different demands for
So
the
you'll
money.
just make this contingent on,
Right, correct. And understanding there could be a budget amendment to absorb this number.
Now, what is the debt payment right now, Cindy? 600 and some odd?
660.
670, 680, something like that.
And what is the loan value?
Hang on one second.
It's a lot more than we're going to get for it.
Yeah.
Not necessarily. The
Eight.
real estate's going up in Vero Beach, and we made a very good deal at some time.
Maybe we could
because
sell it to
based
Eric.
on the sell to Eric.
Sell it to the post office.
Historic Dodgertown.
You've got $6.5 million of principal balance.
Wow.
Yeah.
And 670 debt?
What you've got right now is you've got 2 loans. One of them is principal and interest, and it's going to be paid off in August of 2017. The other one's interest only right now, and as soon as the other one's paid off, this one kicks into principal and interest at the same level. What they did was they took 2 loans and wrapped the debt, so it stayed the same level over all the years.
So we probably won't get the 670 down. We probably won't improve our position 300,000, but we will a good portion, 200 or 300, 250 or 200 or something.
It really depends on what you think you could sell it for.
Yeah, it depends on what you sell for it. But with that said and done, I don't have my eyes personally on anything else for the Dodgertown other than this.
Well, the problem is that we've gone through, we haven't picked anything to cut because for so long we stood stagnant.
Say that again?
We've for so long we've stood stagnant that in this budget we're seeing all of these things that needed to be done and didn't get done.
Yeah.
So maybe if we had been increasing some of these activities throughout the years incrementally, we wouldn't be where we are today with such a huge leap. And in addition, what do you want to cut? Because so far everything, we're not building a pool for city council. We are repairing holes and tattered things and doors that are breaking and windows that aren't fixed and mold. What are we?
A pension plan that's in the hole and so on.
What do we do?
But Well, all I'm suggesting, and we'd have to vote on it later on, is that we have the idea in our mind that we go forward with this pending the sale of the golf course. I don't have anything else I want to do with the golf course.
I think that would be a very good use of it.
I think the policy that you are telling us don't obligate any revenues that could be generated from the sale of the golf course.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I don't know anybody else.
In the meantime, what I'd like to do, and these are my 2 action items, is I want to go back and clarify 2 things with our actuary and our auditors. What are our timelines and deadlines explicitly for funding this in the coming fiscal year? In other words, can we, anytime up till September 30th, if we put some money in, or is that going to count? And second of all, what does really happen if we do partial funding? I know what my actuary's opinion is. I haven't vetted this completely with my auditors, but I want to know what they say before we do it. So it may well be that we can partially fund it and not take a hit for it, and I'll get that information too, so that
Yeah,
when
but we
free
don't have any money to partially fund it.
No, we don't
without
that
this.
either. But depending on, my point is, if the actuarial evaluation says to fully fund it, it's 375, and all you get from Dodgertown is 200, we'd like to know whether that 200 is useful or not in terms of funding the OPEB. So,
But, I mean, if we can get 200, then maybe we could squeeze 95,000 more to hit the 30-year mark.
but at the time we have the money, I'd also like to have a real answer for you as to, is partial funding an option, just so you know what your options are.
I could take from the rating agency, I can take one small negative if it gets the job done, but anyway, that's just me.
But another way to do this is to say, wait a minute, we want to do it this year. And so we want to make cuts of that amount this year, some other way to do it.
That's
And
also an option
just
as well.
say, let's not kick this one down the road any further.
The other, just to keep this in mind, the other comment that the actuary had was, this is one of those things that in order for it to serve you on your balance sheet and actually to work in reality, if your real goal is to solve a problem, you have to commit to this and stay committed to it. You can't say, let's do a 15-year let's make it 27, let's not fund it this year, let's fund it next year. I mean, this is a real commitment that needs to be a long-term commitment.
Because if we put something off to hold it, then when do we add it back if that money's committed?
Because next year you're going to be faced with the 320.
Absolutely, yeah.
I don't know of anything. I mean, I wouldn't, for the world, take $300,000 out of the roads. I mean, you're just making one problem worse for another.
Yeah, I don't, right off the top of my head, I don't know where we would get 300,000 from what we've gone through. But on the same side,
Go down the list again. I mean, you've got the staff increases, the police, the lifeguards, the 450,000 were put into infrastructure, which is roads and police cars. We've got, things that are not really an option, like the health insurance increase and a little bit of an increase in pension, although they aren't the bigger part of the 1.7. I mean, we could go down the list again, but it's, it would require cutting something.
Yeah.
I think our best approach is Jim, say what you said again.
That we just, from the administration, we do not obligate the proceeds from the sale of the golf course, and that we bring those back, and then you'll know what your number is actually in hand and do a budget amendment.
To me, that's the best approach.
And explore partial funding in case that proceeds don't come up to the full 350.
Or if the cuts equal 100,000 as opposed to 328,000, then you might be able, using your roads as an example, I mean, it brings it down to a more realistic number of trying to cut.
You could also, and I don't mean to keep kicking this around, but you could also make some of the expenditures we've got this year contingent on the Dodgertown and have this be a priority. And I'm not saying it should necessarily be, but that's another way to do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You can
Now
cut
we're in
from
the
others,
policy area.
It would be for me.
Yeah.
and then we would bring back the proceeds and you restore what you needed to.
So where are we?
Understanding that if you don't get those proceeds for a year, then things you made contingent, if they were paving, for instance, aren't going to happen until you sell Dodgertown.
Yeah.
So that's really where you're
Well, I'm on the page that Amelia said. I mean, things like driving down 18th Street, there's a real bad street for what it's worth. And I'm at the point that we got to fix the past. This is, I suppose it's past, but it's crossing a new bridge. I'm not so ready to cross new bridges before we
Not
fix
that
the
we've
old
not got a
one.
gun to our head on it.
And it's different than pension in that when someone retires, we don't owe them a lump sum of money. All we owe them is to pay their part of the health insurance premium, our part of their health insurance premium every year. So as we continue to do administrative things like, I mean, look at the substantial difference in the liability. I mean, $20 million in that liability we affected just by a switch in our program. It tells you how much the quote unquote implicit subsidy, the part that isn't real, that, you know, in terms of way we budget, affects the overall liability. So, you know, again, I think you need to tackle it only because of the effect on the balance sheet. But for a few years, a good few years, like 10 years probably, the difference between the unfunded liability versus the net liability of your money minus what you owe is not going to be that
That's why I think we
substantial.
need to start now, because it's going to take that while to get the impact of it.
At the end of the day, you're going to pay it.
That's fair to say. Then where do we get the money, you know?
I feel the same way. I'd like to start now. But on the same side, I'm not so sure that it has a priority over something like the roads that really need to be done now. And so I'm kind of changing my mind and saying, you know, it doesn't have a gun to it, and these other things do have more of a gun to it that we really ought to be.
Well, you can also add it to the revenue side.
In what way?
Well, you can, the only place we have to get money from is the ad valorem tax. I'm not suggesting it, but
Yeah.
I'm saying you could.
Yeah.
That's one place you could get it from. I mean, you only have two places. You could cut something out or you get more revenue.
We could increase the 6% from the utility.
No, not while I'm here.
I have a bug attacking me.
I see it.
I'm not
It's
losing
there.
my mind, so if you can't see that, just...
Touche. Yeah, Mark, come forward.
Mark Mucher, 617 Indian Lilac Road. I got a couple of questions for Cindy. You defined OPEB as only the hospitalization or the medical benefits for retirees. I always thought that this wonderful stored up sick time and vacation time was also part of OPEB. And you also, no? And you also just said that you don't make an immediate payment when somebody retires. Well, we just paid not long ago a superintendent $99,000, and you've got probably a number of employees today that are owed $50,000, and those payments have to be made. So I would suggest you lump all the post-employment benefits, including separation costs. We've been doing that on a pay-as-you-go basis.
Actually, the reason those are not an other post-employment benefit, but they are shown as a liability of the city, as what's called compensated absences. So if you look on page 65, you'll see in the long-term debt booking of the city not only the various revenue notes, but you'll see a line called compensated absences. That's the balance of unpaid sick and vacation leave payouts that we have on the books, so that when people leave, we can pay those. So it's accounted for, but it's not accounted for under OPEB.
Those might be calculated, but I thought they were just funded by, whatever your balances in your salary accounts and things like that.
But there is actually on the balance sheets of all the funds a reserve, and if you look again in the CAFR, there's like a reserved liability on the balance sheet for those numbers that we owe people, and it gets updated every year based on people's salary and the number of hours they're owed.
GASB doesn't consider this as an OPEB.
It considers it as what's called a compensated absences liability, but it is a liability, absolutely. It just doesn't have any discount component to it because we recalculate it every year based on actual payroll data. At the end, on September the 30th, we take the actual payroll data out, and we owe John Smith X number of hours at his current salary, and we book that as a liability. So you'll see year over year it goes up and down as people's salaries change and as people come and go. So it is shown as a liability, but just in a different place.
Okay, but and they're funded or they're not funded?
And they're funded. If you look on the balance sheets of the enterprise funds, there's reserved cash to cover compensated absences.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kramer, do you want to weigh in on this one?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things that kind of bother me. It just seems like our reserves keep climbing, and we don't have a policy as to what, how high they climb before somebody does something about it. We're better than the government recommended averages. Since I've been on council, we've paid over $30 million of debt down. Our debt coverage ratio is better than it's ever been. I don't see a problem of using debt for projects that would absorb maintenance. If you keep patching things, if you bought something new, you wouldn't be patching it anymore. I wouldn't have a problem pulling some of the recreation capital funding and then just replace the whole building. It's a possibility to do these kind of things. Financially, we're in an extremely good position, and we don't seem to want to use, the reserves that have piled up over the years. However you want to see them acquiring. I would suggest that they were possibly acquired because we didn't spend the capital the last several years. That policy needs to be done, and we don't seem to be talking about borrowing to replace long-term assets. If the city's going to be around for another 20 years, why spend the next 20 years fixing something when you can just replace it? The cost is going to be probably about the same.
Let me ask you this, you and Cindy, this jointly. That suggests two things. We could spend $300,000 out of reserves. Look at her head. Or we could borrow $300,000 against some project roads and free up the $300,000 for this.
Well, you've got two issues there. One, you saw me shake my head because I'm going to absolutely tell you I would never recommend depleting reserves for a recurring expenditure. I've seen people start down that path. Nobody wants to be the one to say, now's the year where we raise taxes to cover this recurring expenditure. And I've seen counties drive themselves to a place where adopting their budget one more year would have driven them into a negative fund balance. So I don't know how Jim feels about that, but I think that's a terrible idea.
I would wholeheartedly agree with that. You can't anticipate. But these reserves happen because of an unforeseen events that happen throughout the year. We just, it's something that you end up at the end of the year, and it's got to be something like a capital expenditure, something that doesn't happen on a reoccurring basis.
As far as the borrowing goes, I'm not averse to borrowing, and if for some reason, for instance, we were to build a brand new recreation building, that is an appropriate project to borrow money for. But and the bridge, we're proposing to borrow $840,000 for a 20-plus year bridge replacement.
50.
Or 50 or 50-plus year bridge replacement. But to just say, hey, let's just borrow our way out of some problems this year for $300,000 here and $300,000 there. I really think debt needs to be programmed against a specific item, and I also really strongly believe that, for instance, you borrow money to buy a car, but you don't borrow money for an oil change. So you really need to program your debt to real new capital projects and not to what we call capital, because we legitimately spend once in infrastructure money on it, but it's really maintenance and R&R, and that's not, to me,
somewhere there is a ratio of how much money you would spend on maintenance versus how much money you would spend on debt service. And if we've gotten to the point where we're spending more money on maintenance than what we would want on debt service, maybe we need to start looking at that kind of thing.
Well, true, but if you are talking about a $10 or $12 million building and a 20-year loan, you're talking about $500,000+ a year.
Right.
And that's not what you're spending on maintenance right now. So you're right, though. Again, with the car analogy, there comes a point where you say, it's time to get a new one instead of replacing the tires.
Well, for Leisure Square, between now and the end of fiscal 2020, it's $850,000 total.
Mm-hmm.
We'll be pouring into that building.
And your debt service per year might be that if you built a brand new building.
But that's as far as like what we're paying, what we're saying maintenance costs would be over the next 5 years.
Well, I'm saying it's an option. If you can go
850.
through the different projects, you might be able to find one where it does make sense. I'm just bringing out the point that the finances of the city continually get better and better and better, and somewhere somebody is going to take advantage of that opportunity.
Good financial condition is a positive thing. I know that I've heard so many people tell me that the city's going bankrupt and all that, The fact of the matter is, we do try
It's
to
quite the
build-
opposite.
Yes, I agree.
It is quite the opposite.
But the point is that you're accumulating this wealth in some of these categories, but you know, it's like you refuse to want to use them. Not that I'm encouraging it, but it's got to be used wisely.
I agree with you, though. We need to have a discussion about fund balance policy. I don't know that I would call a $9 million fund balance a big windfall, given our situation. But, you know, I do agree that we need to have a conversation about some sort of adopted policy for, say fund balance stabilization at a certain level. Or maybe if it goes X percentage above that level, you set money aside for some other single purpose. But I really, and we can explore ways that other people do that, but to begin to budget operating expenditures from deficit spending, don't go there.
The idea of dismantling the plant, the utility plant, may become a real, something we really want to do, and maybe we want to use some of the money for that.
You're talking about water, the sewer plant, and then also dismantling of the electric.
Yeah, I mean, maybe those become just critical things for us in the future, and we need some of that cash to build up to do that. I think until we really put our hands around where we want to go as a community, that using the cash or something like that is just premature. I really do right now.
So does anyone have a better position than the one Jim took?
No, not that I can figure out at this point.
And bottom line, we know that your desire is to fund this OPEB either fully or partially as in the coming year. So as we move through the rest of this process, we'll keep our eye out for any, you know, full or partial funding that might come along.
And try to accomplish that goal.
That's our goal.
If that's, do you want a final word on it, or, I mean?
I mean, to me, funding the OPEB is a priority, so.
And we'll take it as one, definitely.
All right, we'll proceed in that direction.
Okay, the last thing we have on the agenda is the hard one, setting a tentative millage rate. And we have a couple things beyond that, but I think we should cross over that.
With that, plus actually setting the public hearing dates, which is part of it. So just to put this in context, I believe this was included in your package. This setting of the rate is a not-to-exceed millage that will actually formally be transmitted by these forms, okay? And I filled them out in draft with the rate that the budget was balanced at. This will formally be transmitted as our first step in the TRIM compliance process to the property appraiser and the tax collector. And this will form the basis for the TRIM notices that go out to the taxpayers on August the 1st. So I know you've all seen your TRIM notice where you see all the different taxing entities, what your thing was last year, what it would be next year at the proposed amount. This would be that proposed amount on the TRIM notices. There's really two forms that get sent, the DR 420, which shows your proposed millage rate, and then the second form, which is the maximum millage levy calculation that indicates what your various millage rates could be at various voting levels. The real takeaway from that second form is that right now, based on everything that we've been provided, your majority vote maximum millage rate, a simple majority, 3-2, is 2.7817. You can go higher as you go to a 2/3 or a supermajority vote, and then even higher at a unanimous vote. But right now, your majority vote maximum millage rate is 2.7817. What we've done is proposed a budget that was balanced at 2.6437, so that meets the requirements for a simple majority vote. Your rolled back rate for the current year is 1.9124. Again, the rolled back rate being the rate at which this year's value and last year's rate, or that rate plus this year's value would equal last year's net revenue. And so the rate that we're proposing is 38% over the rollback rate. I don't know, Tammy, you want to talk about the dates and times for the public hearings? Or
Yes, we actually can have our public hearings on two of our scheduled meetings, September 1st.
No.
September 15th, we can have it on our regular scheduled meeting, but we will need a special call meeting because I guess maybe the county or the school board is meeting on that September 1st. So looking at the calendar, I was looking at that Thursday, September 3rd at 5:15, having a special call meeting for our first budget hearing. You said that's a Thursday? That's a Thursday.
Actually, by TRIM law, which is very peculiar, the very first day that you're allowed to have your first public hearing is September the 3rd. So that's the reason for the 3rd being our first option.
5:15. So we would still have our regular meeting September 1st, have a special call meeting on that week, September 3rd, and then we would have our final budget hearing on September 15th at 6 o'clock, which is our regular scheduled meeting.
And actually, I think what we did last year was we had the budget hearing at 5:15, time certain prior to the regularly scheduled council
worked out
meeting.
well.
You know, again, trim law is peculiar, so it can't be mingled with your regular meeting because it needs to be advertised as a time certain meeting. That the first topic of conversation at the meeting is your budget and your trim. So. So I guess we'll do the easy part first. Do you want to make a motion and a vote that those dates and times work for you? September the 3rd at 5:15 and September the 15th at 5:15 for your final public hearing?
I so move.
Is this voice vote?
Yes, sir.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes 5-0.
And now, the rate itself.
Again, this is the maximum.
Mr. Butcher?
Mark Mutcher again. Before you get too far along, I had some general comments I wanted to make. Is this an appropriate time? And Cindy, Tammy, those two budget meetings don't have to be 2 weeks apart? They don't?
Actually, the requirement is that the ad be published within 15 days of the first meeting and the second meeting be held within 3 to 5 days of the publication of the ad. But there's no shortened of the time frame. As a matter of fact, last year our dates were the 3rd and the 14th, I believe.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I seem to remember something like that. Okay, in terms of general comments, I sat through the first part of Monday's meeting, and I watched as much as I could of yesterday's meeting, and so far I've been here all today. But on Monday, there was a lot of talk about public input and transparency and things like that, but there wasn't any. And then yesterday there was a little bit, but it wasn't invited. People just kind of got up. But and now, of course, it's too late. But I would suggest when you do this next year, there be public input invited.
I called for public comment in each section, Mr. Moocher, for what it's worth. So, I mean, there wasn't much of the public here.
I heard you call for that one time, but
I'm sorry, I attempted to call all times, but go ahead.
Okay. Secondly, I'm not sure how well some of you understand taxation. Jim, you were on the radio last Friday and said that even with this millage increase, we would still be below the county. The county's municipal services are 1.7 or 1.07.
But look at their millage rate throughout the county. It's 3.
32620.
Yeah, but we pay that too. We pay their general.
But what I'm saying is the county tax is 3, ours is 2.
No. We pay 2, plus we pay their general fund. They pay 1.07 municipal, plus they pay their general fund.
If you live in the unincorporated area, how much do you pay in ad valorem tax?
In municipal services, you pay 1.07.
No, county tax. It goes to.
We pay more than they do.
We pay a slight bit more than
And our municipal portion is almost twice as much, and will be more than twice as much. Also, if we make this,
Everyone pays the 3.
But this is the difference, right?
Yeah. But the fact is they have a 3.33 millage rate.
And we pay that as well.
Yeah. But they do have a 3.33. We pay it, but they do have a 3.33.
well, then the school board has an 8,
Almost 8.
and we pay that.
Yeah.
But that doesn't It's not, we're talking apples and oranges
And
here.
in no arguing, but I think the point that the reason that keeps coming up is I think the point that you made, Mr. Mayor, was that the city's relative percentage of the total tax bill is extremely small. So when we talk about a tax increase, it's not 30% on the whole thing. I think that was the point that we were trying to make.
It's roughly 11%.
Well, that was going to be my next point. It's almost 12% this year, but
Well,
if we
okay.
go with this one, it'll be 15.3. So that was another
it's a
point I
3%.
was going to make.
So it's a 3%.
Frankly, there's 3.2620 that we get the county. There's some very good things in the county, the election, and many, many, many more. But I got to tell you, what we get from the county for the 3.26 and what we get from the city for whatever we charge, there's a big disparity. We provide great services, great police reaction time. We provide parks and recreation for the whole darn county. I just don't want to. I don't want to hear it.
I understand all that.
I think 326 is a higher number that I like. But anyway.
I understand all that, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about you're saying that our rate is lower than the counties, and I'm saying it's twice as much.
Yeah, what if you live in South Beach? What do you get for the one? I think it's 1.17. Is that correct?
1.07.
1.07.
And that's gonna stay the
What do you
same
get?
next
You get
year.
police occasionally. You have short-term rentals. You
No
get
argument.
virtually nothing.
No argument.
Once a
But
week
don't
pickup?
say that.
Once a
don't
week,
say that
garbage
they pay
pickup?
more
Come
than
on,
we
Mark,
do.
give me a break.
All right, we're not talking apples and oranges. All right, now, Pilar brought this up yesterday. Y'all made a big deal about the electric transfer to the general fund going down, but the general administrative transfer is going up by $110,000. And there was an answer to that, and it had to do with the factors and things. But this is the, what is that, a $1.7 million figure that when we talked about a sale, if we didn't have an electric utility, we would only save $500,000. So if you're looking for a place to cut in electricity, I would, it's going to hurt you in the general fund, obviously. But that's going, my point is that's going up a lot more than your transfer to the general fund is going down. So don't pat yourselves on the back too much on that. And then
But again, that's based on actual factors as opposed to simply being a percentage of revenue. But that's, again, another whole
I understand
conversation.
that you've got ways you figure out what that transfer is, but the fact is that if the electric goes away, those charges or those amounts don't go away. A fraction of those amounts go away. And the last thing that I wanted to mention, and just came up in my mind today with all this discussion about Dodger Town and everything else, was that you're assuming that the 1 cent sales tax is going to be here forever. And it's coming up for renewal in a couple of years, and I, for one, intend to fight it for a number of reasons that I stated when I fought it and lost last time. But I might be able to convince some more people this time. But I just warn you not to assume that that's always going to be there, because it is subject to the whim of the voter, and God knows what they're going to do. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's probably another good reason to watch our fund balances to make sure they're.
Yeah, because that sales tax is about 1.9 million, if anybody hasn't looked at it. It's
Oh.
significant.
Mr.
In the
Day.
county, it's even.
True, but I'm talking about just for the city of Vero Beach. I mean,
You're
that's,
right. Mr. Day.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, Council. For the record, Ken Day, 1846 21st Avenue. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for your help through these last few days. I know they're very hard, and you do a lot of prep work on this budget situation. Also like to thank you in advance for not pulling out of any of the infrastructure projects we need, Leisure Square, Community Center. You've heard about the torn awnings, other needed repairs, and for reasons, they were put off for a number of years, and thank you for keeping those things in the budget. On the tax situation, yes, we do pay county taxes. Let me give you an example real quick of the type of service that I received from the county when I had some concerns. Along 20th Avenue, which is what I call where there's a big canal, on east side, south end, there's a jogging path or walking path. It's it's the black pavement. For a number of years, it has potholes in it, high grass that really goes over into the pathway. I had called to try to get some help to get that repaired because it's the county side of the house that's supposed to take care of. First of all, when you call the county, they're very kind to take your phone call, but there's many things you have to go through before you actually kind of get an answer. Then at the end of the day, there is no money to do anything. And this running path and walking path has been in disrepair for quite a long time. Oh, by the way, on the mainland, we do go out, we do walk, we do run. I run a lot in the morning. There are other people out on this pathway. Tried to talk with one of the commissioners. They shifted it back over to our side of the house where we're the ones supposed to take care of it. Well, that's not our area of responsibility because it's a county road. Reason that, the canal, some of the canal is taken care of inside the city limits is the city is kind enough to foot the bill to take care of that area because it does border some of the neighborhood areas there and also St. Francis. So the city is kind enough to keep that upkeep, and we appreciate that. And you're not going to take that away, and we do appreciate that. Another example, you're all familiar with St. Francis Manor. That's a retirement home. Okay, there's a little bridge that was put in a number of years ago. That is the responsibility of St. Francis Manor. Well, anyway, that developed some situations here over the last few months. The county didn't even want to bring out the little cones and the signs to close it off. They said, well, it's a city's responsibility. Finally, they did decide to come out because there's a hole there. So their service and the service that you all provide as a city is night and day. And that stuff does not come for free. Also, it would be helpful to a lot of us on the outside looking in. When you talk about the tax increase, we all know what we pay in ad valorem taxes on our tax bill. We know what that amount is. If you could put it into perspective for a lot of us, what is the actual dollar amount? I don't think you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars extra on our tax bill. It is going to go up, but it would be helpful to do, like sometimes they take an average property for X number of dollars in the city, it's homesteaded, well, this is going to be their increase. I think that would be helpful for people to know. But the service within the city limits is fantastic. And I know going forward, listening to you all for the last few days, you want to provide the services and you want to patch things up that have been neglected over the last few years. And I really do appreciate that, and there's other people that appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks for your comments. Further public comment? Okay, I see no further public comment. We're going to have to deal with the tax raise, so what do we do?
I propose we do what we said before, the 2.6. I think it's not quite 2.6. What is it?
It's right here.
26437.
Which would generate what, $1.7 million?
$1.7 million.
And of the $1.7 million, $640,000 would go to salary, if I'm right. $500,000 to benefits, and $480,000 the capital transfer. I'd roughly guess it. The $480,000 is capital transfer. The
$450,000 is capital transfer.
$450,000, okay.
$641,000 goes to salaries. Health insurance is a little over $100,000. The pension is about $183,000, and then there's the risk management move into the general fund that incurs some of those costs as well.
So what's the total benefits though, with what things went up? And pensions and all the rest of it.
Total benefits, the total on the health insurance is 196,000. The total on the pension is 232.
Total on what?
The pension is 232. And the total on the salaries is 641. So you were right, it's about about 400,000.
So it's 641 in salary, 428 in benefits. Do I have that right?
Correct. Again, broken into benefits associated with the new positions and benefits associated with the existing positions and increases in health
450 in
insurance.
the capital.
450 in the capital, and then about $76,000 in extra capital expenditures in the general fund. And then about $24,000 to the good in other miscellaneous changes back and forth.
Where did the other $150,000 go? Where did we spend that?
Again, you end up with, like, I like to take the broad strokes. You've got another put and take of about 80 or so in just little things spread throughout the 20 departments. I mean, I don't nail it down to that last little bit out of 20 million. So I don't. I mean, I could, but the good place to look for that is the roll-up of on the third or fourth page of the whole general fund. You can see all the smaller, 5,000 here, 2,000 there, puts and takes in things like, gas and oil, which saved us some.
Well, if we end there, could you put that, together within, 10 or 15,000? Not
Within 10 or 15? Sure. It's actually there in the budget book.
No,
But I can roll it up for you even more if you'd like. No problem.
Ms. Graves?
Nobody wants to do this. But the fact of the matter is, tell me somewhere that you think is appropriate to cut. And if you can find it, let's cut it. But right now, you saw the pictures, you saw the buildings. Do we just keep letting them sit like that? I mean, we've put it off for so long.
I've got no problem with capital plans. I'd vote for the tax increase for the capital. The HR decision was something that I thought was disastrous, and I'm not going down that road.
You're talking about part of the HR, which is how we handle pension into the future. I think that's your illusion.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. I don't want to go deeper. I just want to understand what you were saying. Ms. Turner, your comment?
Everybody thinks that the economy's turning around. And yes, we're seeing a $338,000 increase in our property tax revenue just due to increased valuations. But I ask our taxpayers, are they seeing an 8% increase in their incomes? I think that's, maybe some are doing better in the market than I am or whatever, and maybe they are seeing that. But to come at them with a 30% increase in 1 year on top of this 8% that we're already realizing from the property is untenable. I objected to the format of this budget process and starting with a budget that was already 30%. I think by doing that, it eliminates the scrutiny that you would have under each project being added to it. And I would vote against that motion.
Okay, your point about the economy is certainly a good one. I suffer from it because I live largely, as on my retirement benefits. And when you look on what's going on in China, in particular, much more so than Greece, boy, I'm really shaky about what's going to happen. I'm going to be for the 264. It's very painful for me. And I remember what George H. Bush did, so you can never say never, but I think we got to look at a one-time fix. And we got to say the revenue of this city isn't sufficient to support the services of this city. And, we've been kicking the can down the road for a long time, so that would mean if I'm reelected on that platform, which is a difficult one to run on, I would say it's a one-time fix, and my best intentions are, I can't seal my lips, that was a mistake. So I would make a motion to accept the tentative number 264, whatever the decimal point.
26437.
Yes, I would make a motion there. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Once again, you've identified a lot of good projects, but it's like even in your own home, you can't get everything all at one time, we have to work within a reasonable period, and I think we're just trying to do everything all at one time, and it's putting an undue burden on our ratepayers, especially at a time when we're still have been unsuccessful in lowering electric rates, and you're looking at another utility, putting a stormwater utility tax on top of it. I just think that's overly burden our taxpayers.
I respect your position, and this is one of these dialogues we can have, and we can have, and we can have, and there's certainly two rights in it. There's so many dialogues in life that really are. The only thing I can say is last year I tried to ebb the taxes up somewhat, and I was outvoted. And I said then that we needed to begin a program of increasing taxes. So now we're stuck with, and I've been here 4 or 5 years in one capacity or another, and now we're stuck with all the things that should have been done. I think we got to fix them. So that's what I think. But your point is not invalid. I understand what you're saying.
I think nobody came into this process this year, this budget process, with the idea of raising taxes. It's certainly not this amount. But when we sat down, the meeting before the budget process really started, and looked at all the issues that were there, and when we added it up, it came to this amount, and it wasn't because we had started with the idea of let's raise taxes. It was the holes that we've got that are in this city, and it's things that really have to be done. And I actually think that we've got more issues ahead of us that have not come out that we've really got to address. The whole secession with personnel, I think there's an awful lot of things to be done still. This is not going to fix everything. This raise is not going to get us where we want to be. We're going to have to go through some other things later on, I'm sure, once we get into a planning process. And this is the first step in a long road to getting the city where it should be. But I think it's a very good step, and I think the process was good. I think that it was pretty thorough, and I think everybody got their questions answered, I think, pretty much during the process, and I thought it was well done.
Mrs. Bach, I have a motion and a second. I could call the motion, but Emma, is it more proper to have more public comment or call the motion?
I think you should call the motion.
I'd still have one more statement.
Yeah, anything you want to say is fair. Go ahead.
Thank you. Once again, my objection was to starting out with this 30%. We went to staff and said, hey, we're looking at a 30% budget increase. Put in anything you want. A lot of these things, like I said, are great, wonderful. I'm not disputing that. But what do we really need? And us as stewards of taxpayers' money, that's the approach you start with, is what do you really need? Not what's nice to have, but what do you need?
But I think that's the thing. We do really need to not have holes in roofs. We do really need to not have roads that are cracking. We do really need to have facilities that people use that are safe. We're not talking about any brand new big projects. We're talking about repairing holes.
No, we're also talking about 9% on the pension plan and contributions. We're talking about extra staff. We're talking about redoing things.
Well, if we want to tell the public we can only have this many festivals per year, sorry, then we don't need some of that extra staff and recreation. But the public keeps coming forward with things they want to do, and
let's see that they'll come forward and want to pay for it, Ms. Graves.
Well, every year they get to exercise their vote and tell you what they think.
This is just a maximum. This is not the end all. I think this just starts the argument. You've got till September.
Yeah, I think you're taking a very wise position on it because it only sets the maximum. If we can improve on it, we're responsible to do so. Well, I've called the motion. I think we should probably have a roll call on it.
Yes, sir. Mr. Roll?
Yes.
Ms. Graves?
Yes.
Mrs. Turner?
No.
Mr. Kramer?
No.
Mayor Winger?
Yes, it passes us 3-2.
Just to answer one question, this is approximately $61 per 100,000 assessed and taxable value. So if you look at your tax bill and if you fall in, you have $50,000 worth of your homestead exemption, subtract that, and it's about $61 per 100,000 of assessed value.
What was
So
it?
if it was a $300,000 house, after whatever the set aside was, it would be $180.
$180.
A year.
And $183 for the year.
It's more for me.
What was it? What was the other number if it was at 2.0336?
It was at 2.0336. It's now at 2.6437.
Correct. That is,
So
so it's
again-
61 per 100, but it came from what?
From $2.03 per thousand to $2.64 per thousand. The millage rate is the number of dollars per $1,000 of assessed
I
value.
understand that. But $61 per 100,000 is where the maximum millage is set. What was it last
That's an
year?
increase.
Right.
That's the increase.
The increase is 61.
The
Yes.
increase.
The increase is
Yes,
61.
the increase is 61.
Mr. Mosher?
Mark Mucher again, real quickly, when it comes to understanding tax, the subject of understanding taxes, you know that you're going to put a big ad in the paper that says your taxes are increasing 38%, not 30%. And that's a trim number, and it's on your backup. And then the only other thing I wanted to say was when we had a conversation about getting out of the electric business, we were talking about a tax increase of this magnitude at that time, and everybody ran around like the sky was falling. So we're still hopefully going to be looking at that.
I want to correct that. Mr. Gorey and the Gorey plan figured out that what we could do was liquidate the pension debt. He can come up here and explain it to you, and it would have had no consequence. In other words, selling the electric and taking the working capital out of the electric, assuming we get to keep that, and liquidating the pension, the net effect of that whole thing, and Mr. Gorey, you can come forward and say if I'm wrong or right, would have been no effect on taxes. And the sale of the electric, under that set of circumstances, I mean, the sale of electric is something I think everyone's for. It hasn't happened, but it is inaccurate to say that we would have had to raise the taxes if we hadn't sold the electric.
Well, people
Am I right
went
or wrong,
around
Mr. Gorey?
Reamar and said that the taxes were going to triple, but it seemed to me the last number that came from the sale proposal was that we were going to be short something like $1.6 to $1.8 million, which is where we are today. And where we may be tomorrow if we ever are able to sell the electric plant. Thank you.
Again, just for clarification on the trim process too, though, is that you will not be placing an ad in the paper until after your first public hearing. And so whatever millage you vote at your first public hearing is what will be in your ad. This is the amount that will go out on your trim notices that get mailed to the individual property owners. The 38% is in your backup and actually is the number that I stated a few minutes ago as the percentage of change over the rolled back rate. So again, that is what will go in your trim notices. What the advertisement will not be published until after your first public hearing.
Mr. Degg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, for the record, Ken Degg, 1846 21st Avenue. Going forward, I know it's going to be a difficult next few weeks with a tax increase that is on the table. You all made very good comments of why you were for it and why you're not for it. Going forward, whatever you decide in the next few weeks, if things need to be pulled out of the budget, please let us know exactly what they're going to be. If you take a look at your additional folk at the police department, I would ask you to please leave the additional folk, the 2 officers that they're putting on the road, alone. I can tell you right now, over on your mainland, you do have situations in your neighborhoods where we're on an uptick of not so nice things, and I'm not going to go into the graphic details. We have situations. We need those extra people for the reasons that I stated the other day. The 2 on the island side, the 2 in the middle, and the 2 on the mainland. Your zone, if you get a chance, look at how your zone, it's called zoning. Look at how the officers cover in the zoning. It's still a little thin on the mainland, but at least we'll have a little additional coverage. I also told you going forward with the train situation, when we need help west of the tracks, those trains are going to get longer, busier, and the emergency folks sometimes will not be able to get to us. Your first responders are your police, and those folks that are in those cars are highly trained. So if nothing else, please kind of leave that be with the extra folk there. You've heard over and over again the bad condition of Leisure Square. I tell you right now, you all know it's used by many, many, many people. We're hoping you at least move on getting the roof squared away where the silly thing stops leaking. If you go in their restrooms over there, they're pretty nasty. That's not a good face for the city of Vero. You go to our community center, the freaking awning is ripped up and tattered. Not a good example for the city of Vero Beach. So those are some of the things I hope you would keep in. Obviously, going forward, if there's areas that can be tweaked down, of course, please do it. And, of course, lower the tax rate. I, for one, really don't want to give any politicians any more money or even a penny if I don't know how you're going to spend it. And there has been a question, are you beefing up the reserves with this extra tax? I'm hoping you're not. I had talked to the city manager the other day, and that is not the case. So going forward, please, as you may have to cut, but please watch what you're cutting. Please remember us of the ones that have the needs. It was brought up by someone the other day about the type of coverage we have with our officers, of why do you have so many and other places don't? Well, there's reasons for that. The mayor really gave a very good description of how our city is set up. We have the rich, we have the working class, and we have the poor. We're like a microcosm here. Any of the oddball things that can happen usually happen inside this city. So we need the police protection, the police coverage. A lot of people come through. I call it our doors as far as our city. It's very well used. Our rec facilities are used. Everybody and their uncle loves our city, but they use it heavily. Somebody has to pay for the maintenance. And I would like to go forward and present a good face. The economy is up on an uptick, but as Mrs. Turner stated, you have to be very careful how you're going to spend your money because money still is tight. A lot of us out there working, we have to watch every penny that comes into. I'm a business owner. That's why I'm able to be here at these meetings. But I have to make up on the weekends. I have to work. I'm not a wealthy man. But I want to come here. I wanted to say a couple of things. A lot of folks feel like I feel. We do need some help on the mainland. We hope you leave some of those important things in your budget as you go forward. And if you have to make your cuts, you have to make your cuts to bring your tax rate down. Thanks for your time.
All right, Mr. Gorey.
Yeah, to address the question, the plan that I put together and we in the Finance Commission had reviewed and passed assumed a 1/1/14 effective date of the sale. And one of the things that wasn't mentioned is that in addition to taking the proceeds at that time and paying down the pension shortfall, also remember that 1/3 of the pension shortfall was being absorbed with the transfer of 100 people to Florida Power and Light, in addition to a portion of their accrued vacation and hospitalization. What happened since then, there were a number of ramifications, including a $52 million addition, of which $26 million would be paid by. So circumstances change and time changed. But at the point in time, in our best estimates, it did look like we could be on a relatively even keel with our taxes if it were sold on 1/1/14. So I don't know whether that addresses without going into great detail. Secondly, I looked last night at the 11,000 residences in the city of Vero Beach. And this goes from everything from mobile homes to apartments that are owned condominiums and to single-family homes. The median is about $150,000 for all of the residential units in the city of Vero Beach. Now, obviously, it's skewed if you take averages, because the average, not the median, is in the 240,000 range, which shows the skewing that Ken, you had talked to, that the differential is not linear, but is somewhat geometrical in terms of the various properties we have and the diversity and scope of the city that I know we all have to deal with. Well, and finally, if I can just take a minute, normally in the course, the council would ask the Finance Commission to look at your proceedings. And with Cindy's great help, we would, the commission would consider a number of issues. But one of the ones is Vice Mayor Kramer, Freudian slip, said that a review of the appropriate level of the general fund reserve is a worthwhile review based upon best practices, risk assessment, and a policy. And as Cindy has said, there isn't really a policy today, but one which would be valuable going forward. So, and then the rest of the whatever the commission would review. So that's my comments.
I have a question for you. Don't leave.
Okay.
When are you going to meet next? Because I think an interesting forum. Mr. Mucha brought it up, and so on. First of all, in the work that we've done in these last 3 days, how correct we are, and also it's an interesting forum for people to come forward and comment with what we've come up to. One of the things that hasn't been recently mentioned, part of the increased expenses, 3% for salaries, which I think we have to have. But all of these assumptions that went into it, I think it's important to have a Finance Commission meeting, or possibly two, before September 3rd. One, to deal with the whole topic of, is this intelligent where we are, and to give the public a forum. And the second one is the point that Mr. Kramer brings up, because I think he's absolutely correct as far as, cash reserves.
As far as the Finance Commission meeting goes, my intention was to do what we've done every year, which is to have a Finance Commission meeting in early August to talk about the budget. When I say the fund balance policy is a worthwhile conversation, it is. It's not something that we're going to be able to get to the bottom of by the end of August. And I'm just being honest, given limited resources in the Finance Department. That's, I
understand.
We can talk about it lightly, but to establish a policy that would actually impact your budget adoption for next year in time for September 3rd. And honestly, at this point, I don't think you're above a reasonable amount. I think if you had a couple more years of a $500,000 or $600,000 gain, you might be getting to a number. But right now, you're at 5 months or so, and I'm going to tell you, I don't think that's a over-the-top fund balance. So I don't think that one's as critical as obviously the Finance Commission reviewing this budget before your adoption on September the 3rd.
And I wasn't suggesting you could do both at the same time, because each one is more than one session, quite frankly.
And one matters for September the 3rd, which would be one session, and the other one doesn't matter until, we need to tackle it before next year, but it won't affect September the 3rd.
But starting the conversation is a good one.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But maybe not to the detriment of the more time-pressing thing, which is adopting a budget on September the 3rd.
So I guess what
I'd say
we're
the first week of
suggesting
August.
You'll have a meeting in August, as Cindy said, and look at everything we've done and come back with comment, possible cuts, reaction to it. And the second one is when she's ready, you'll look
Absolutely.
at cash balance and give us some guidance on what you think the policy should be, your commission.
All right, thank you. And of course, the other issue that you've discussed at great length incisively is the recommendation of the Finance Commission was to consider a funding of a trust for OPEB. And so, again, we'll review that with any updated information, Cindy, you have that you can clarify. You've done a sensational job of taking a very complex subject and trying to present it in a way that even us laymen can understand. So thank you very much. And then I can turn to Tammy and ask when we can sit as soon as possible a meeting, because we do have a meeting with the Utilities Commission to review Mr. Wright's RFPs, if in fact that is still in play given some of the latest issues.
That is still in play. Still
Thank
on
you.
street.
I will work with Cindy in setting up that meeting. We do have the Joint Finance and Utilities Commission meeting set for August 31st at 9 o'clock.
Well,
And I would suggest that
Be
Mr.
sooner.
Gorey, that it might be good to have the third quarter financial reports in conjunction with the budget review. So I would be shooting for sometime toward the end of the first week of August, probably, and right in that time frame. So I'll work with Tammy and have them.
Thank you, because we always take your lead based upon the information, and that would give us some clarification, by the way, in terms of what any residuals contribution to the fund would be.
And actually, right now, we're not looking like there will be much of one. But again, that's a good conversation for that meeting.
Right.
Again, I would, with council's permission, the issue of having the fund balance reserve policy affect the budget is one that I would suggest to you is next year's conversation that we can start now, but not in time to affect your budget adoption for this year. Because I don't think you have much of a fund balance to work with, actually.
Thank you very much.
Any further public comment? All right, we'll close public comment. We have
Just one comment I want to make. I was mistaken on the property or the tax rate. The county tax rate is lower than ours. We are at 2 on the municipal millage, but they have control of so many other tax rates if you add those in. But I do stand corrected. Ours is 2 and theirs is 1.
and if you look at
1.7.
just looking at South Beach, I mean, they don't have roads to take care of. We do. I mean, the roads are all either state roads or they're private communities. I mean,
And we have chosen to have additional, for example, police protection. We have chosen to take over operation of parks and those facilities. So,
Well, if you add the county's rate plus their HOA fees, most of the county is going to gated communities anyway. So, I mean, you add that in, it's a lot higher in the county than it is in the city.
all right, we have 2 subjects. Randy has a gentleman here to do a presentation. I wanted to bring up one brief subject that I brought up on Monday, and when I was selected as mayor in November, I said there were some things I wanted to finish. One had to do with the lagoon. I think we're well on our way of doing several things that would improve the health of the lagoon. The second one is this very session, facing the fact that we have infrastructure problems and so on. And the third one is I've had some involvement in the electric, and I would hope by the time of the August 19th meeting that we have, come to some useful place on the OUC. Maybe we will, maybe we won't, but I think we will. So all I'm saying is I am willing to continue and finish the term as mayor, or I'm willing to have a new mayor selected August 19th. I'd like to say one other thing. Either which way, if I am reelected, or if I were to step down, I'm going to nominate Jay Kramer, either in August, or I'll nominate him in November. So I'm perfectly willing to continue, or I'm perfectly willing to change the leadership as I committed to back in November of 2014.
Well, you're pretty much, about 75% all the way through?
I'm sorry it took so long. I wasn't.
No,
very
I just, I think we're kind of in a situation that you might as well just finish the thing out. I mean, what are we talking about? Gosh, we have even meetings are canceled. 5 meetings or so, plus budget. So it's at your pleasure, but I think you got a tough session going, and I think you're doing a good job. So if you want to keep going through, I'd be happy to see you finish it.
Well, that's kind of you. All the rest of you get to put your voice in too.
Once again, according to the charter, the mayor is elected in November, and I think we did that. And finish your duties.
Go for it.
Okay, well,
Don't change.
None of us
horses
want it.
midstream.
None of us want it.
it has its problems, and I will not be standing if I'm reelected in November. So anyway, I've told you who I'm going to nominate. Everyone knows that. Okay, Mr. Old, the forum's yours.
I've invited Mr. Michael Levinson, who's sitting in the back, to come up to give us a little presentation on strategic planning. His background, he works with Craig Dunlop and his company, which is a financial advising company to several different municipalities and schools around. Also, Mr. Levinson has been city manager for Coral Springs for several years and did a very good job down there and knows a lot about strategic planning. And so I've asked him to come and do a little presentation. And if you would come forward, we could get started with it. Yeah.
It's probably a good idea.
It's all relative, Cindy.
Good morning.
Pleasure. Long, but not bad at all. Left at the right time.
Good. Good.
Okay, I got you.
Did you want to use this one?
Let's use this.
Okay.
Okay, I guess I'll just speak to the slides since everyone is scattered around. Good morning, everyone. As Mr. Old said, Commissioner Old, I am Mike Levinson, and I've spent the last 40 years in local government management or working in the financial world servicing local governments. I did serve as a city manager at Coral Springs for over 15 years. We were the first government to receive the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award, which many people refer to as our nation's Nobel Prize for Business. Today I serve in part as President Emeritus of the Florida Sterling Council, which houses the Governor Sterling Award for Performance Excellence. And I travel the state, among my other duties, as a Senior Vice President of Dunlap, promoting performance excellence with local governments using the tools and assessment techniques that are available through the Florida Sterling Council and the Malcolm Baldrige Award program. So it's a pleasure to be here this morning. And by the way, I sat in the back and listened to the conversation, and the challenges you face are no different than most local governments, particularly local governments of your size around the country. Governments today, with the protracted recovery, are still facing the challenges of insufficient revenues to serve increases in demands for local government services and how to fill that gap. But as economists, and I am one, often recommend during periods of economic contraction, that's a great opportunity to plan for the future and to position yourself for recovery in order to improve the quantity and quality of services to your community, again, for the benefit and betterment of your community and your customers specifically. So what I want to do this morning, what I've been asked to do, is not necessarily to address your challenges specifically and give you ideas of what other governments are doing, but to present a larger context. And that context is one of a new approach to the business of local governments that many local governments are utilizing today moving forward into the future to accomplish what I just described, and not just here, but internationally as well. I work with the Japan Productivity Center. I've worked with recently with New Zealand Performance Excellence. I work in the United Arab Emirates with the Minister of Municipalities in Chile and other places. But this approach is being adopted by many local governments, and they are achieving some significant results, improvements incrementally as they move forward with their strategy. So if anything, it's a best practice. Now I have to say that some local governments have adopted the entire model. Some have taken aspects or portions of the model and are growing it incrementally over time. It really depends on the size of the local government. So let's just start off here. The objective here is to come up with a new approach for the business of local governments, enabling that local government to align your scarce resources with the needs and expectations of your customers in the most responsive and fiscally responsible way. Outcomes that have been experienced, that continue to be experienced through this model, improving organizational performance, improving customer satisfaction, improving bottom line results, improving financial sustainability. And looking back over my 15 years or so as city manager of Coral Springs, we were able to achieve as high as a 97% satisfaction rating from our residents, about a 96% satisfaction rating from our businesses, and a 97% satisfaction rating from our employees, our internal customers, if you will, while achieving AAA ratings from all three major rating agencies on the street for our full faith and credit. So this approach, as I will describe, is not theory. It's actually a proven, practical approach that. I'll get to the next one. A proven, practical approach that adopts the best principles, practices, and decision-making tools of high-performing companies, largely in the private sector, and adapts these traits to the unique needs of local governments. And as I said, I've worked within this model for 15 years and was able to produce the results I just touted. When I say that adopts principles, practices, and decision-making tools, a lot comes from some major companies in the state of Florida: Ritz-Carlton and Hospitality, Disney, Xerox, Boeing, Baptist Hospital, Texas Instruments out of Texas, MD Anderson also out of Texas, and the list goes on. Cities that are using this approach or portions of this approach include cities like Lake Tahoe, actually South Lake Tahoe, Irving, Texas, Bellevue, Washington, Yakima, Washington, Austin, Texas, Miami Beach, which was mentioned earlier, Fort Collins, Eugene, Oregon, and a number of school districts in the state of Florida. And so it is again proven and practical. But it is in fact a shift in behavior. It's a shift in the way we think. It's a shift in the way we plan, and it's a shift in the way we execute. Adopting this model requires that you think and behave differently, more broadly, and sometimes more objectively using tools, so forth, that I'll talk about shortly. I'll give you an example just quickly, because I know we don't have a lot of time, but how this works. During the 1990s, Coral Springs, Florida, was the 9th fastest growing city in the country. Westinghouse was the primary developer of the community, but they had a very good strategy, and that was that for every city block, they began developing internally, single-family homes and so forth. And then as you moved out towards the major arterials, the roadways that define that block, you had transitional zoning, transitional uses, and adjacent to the roadways was multifamily. Well, Westinghouse pegged Coral Springs as the city in the country, so they didn't want to build multifamily first. They wanted to build single-family residential first. In fact, the land that multifamily was to be developed on was kept in an agricultural state for obvious reasons, and much to the advantage and use of the realtors at the time, promoting that image of the city in the country. But residential development, single-family development was over. And now it became time to start developing multifamily. Now, multifamily made a lot of sense from a planning standpoint as a transitional use. The city also subscribed to the county's affordable housing program, which multifamily would offer as well. But you got to think beyond that. What were the economic consequences of multifamily development within our community, recognizing that we satisfied those two other concerns? And what we did was we built a fiscal impact model, which was a marginal analysis that captured what the incremental impact of multifamily and other end uses within our community would be for all sources of revenues within and expenses within our general fund. And what we found out is if we sat on our hands and did nothing and allowed the multifamily development to occur at build-out, we would have been faced with about a 28% increase in our millage rate, which at the time was the lowest millage rate for cities of 100,000 population or less. So what do? Well, we used the model and went back and looked at it and said, okay, what end uses generate positive fiscal impact? And we found out, retail is pretty much a break even, but in industrial, light manufacturing, office uses and so forth had pretty significant positive fiscal impact on our general fund. Well, we took a step back and said, okay, at what pace will this multifamily be built? So we made that projection, incorporated into our 5-year, 10-year forecast, and then said, okay, how can we counterbalance this? Well, we went into the economic development business. And we hung our shingle out and started attracting companies from all over South Florida and other areas, knowing how many square feet of development we would need on an annual basis to neutralize, in effect, the negative fiscal impacts of multifamily. And we were successful in that up until the recession. And I can say that our millage rate didn't change for all those years because we were successful in economic development, but we were also successful in planning and positioning ourselves for addressing that challenge rather than sitting on our hands and saying, well, it will be what it is, and dealing with it on a situational basis. That kind of capsulizes the difference in the way you think and the way you plan and execute. Okay, local governments that are going through this kind of paradigm shift, if you will, have to make a case for change. Everybody has to make a case for change because if you keep doing the same things the same way and expect better results, we know that that's not going to work. If you work harder, that doesn't work as well because you exhaust your human resource and morale goes down and productivity goes down and your challenges financial challenges increase. And so what is the case for change? In governments that I've worked with for many years now, there's a number of reasons. And today, protracted recovery, lower property values, no tolerance for tax increase, depleted reserves, reduced staff, service cuts, high service demands, aging infrastructure. Well, that sounds familiar, right? There's a common thread with many local governments, and so you make your case. Now, for example, if a lot of cities are again in the same boat that you are, having to increase their property tax rates, but they also, along with that, have said, well, we're going to do things a little differently. And as a result of that, of these changes that we're going to make, we're going to become more efficient. We're going to better align our resources with your needs and expectations. And we're going to become customer focused and data driven and results oriented. Some of the traits of high performing local governments that I see there are about 8 of them, and the first one is accountability. I always say that credibility is the currency of leadership, and governments that we work with, governments that use this model, have made their promises to their community through their strategic plans and through their business plans, capital improvement programs, etc., and have also decided, we're going to determine what outcomes to expect as a result of this. Let our community know and hold ourselves accountable for that. And of course, the extent to which you can live up to your promises establishes your credibility and determines your leadership. The quality of your leadership. Linkage, again, alignment of resources. I was just working with a city whose mission statement is best place to live, work, and raise a family. Well, everything they do, every dollar they spend, supports and is linked to the 3 operative words within that mission statement. Live, work, and family within the community. Deployment. The business model needs to be pushed down into the organization. Everyone needs to use it, and undergirded by a corporate culture that's often defined by the core values of your organization, and also needs to use the decision-making tools that are afforded to them. Outcomes. I mean, you have to measure outcomes of your core business processes. If, for example, if emergency medical service is a core business process, and it usually is, unless another entity like a county is providing that for you, but it should be in your interlocal agreement, how do you define success? Well, fractile response is the measurement that most local governments use around the country, and oftentimes, depending on from which point in the process you measure from, it's usually from the time the call comes in to the first most appropriate vehicle arrives on the scene, 8 minutes or less, 90% of the time. So you assign outcomes to your core business services. Also, if cycle times, I mean, a lot of the work that we do in local government has cycle times, whether it's permitting, accounts payable, for example, you can assign a cycle time to those as well, and then you can compare yourselves with other local governments to see really how well you're doing within your competitive framework. Integration. That's really the harmony of data, analysis, policy, plans, actions, and results. It all has to work together. It all has to come together. Technology, using technology, and not just hardware, but application software as well, to promote reliability, to foster better communications internally and externally, and also to improve productivity and most importantly, to improve safety. Culture, I'll talk about a little bit later. I just did, actually. And then sustainability, understanding the long-term consequences of decisions that you're going to make today. I mean, a perfect example is when you undertake a capital improvement project, if you do a life cycle cost analysis of that project, and if, let's say, it's an income-producing project, a gymnasium, for example, the operating cost of that, the present value of the operating expense that goes along with that improvement usually represents about 90% of the life cycle cost. It's not the capital cost, which is tantamount to saying the capital is only about 10%. So when your lobbyists come up to you and say, hey, I can get you this money for free and you can build this, understand that 90% of that life cycle cost is going to be in the expenses. And when a lot of cities take those dollars and build those facilities and don't incorporate it into their capital improvement program and their forecasting models, the operating consequences, well, a few years down the line, after those facilities open, they wonder why they have to increase their operating millage to afford the operating consequences. So important to look into the future and use certain tools. This is basically a holistic and integrated approach. This is what successful private sector companies utilize, and they're successful because they touch all of these bases. But what does this mean to local government? Well, this is taking that approach and translating it into a business model. Sometimes people say, well, it looks like a mouse, and I say, well, I was very heavily influenced by Disney years ago when we formulated this business model. But it basically takes the tenets of that approach that I just showed you in listening, learning, planning, implementing, funding, and then informing your customers. And I'll just go through this quickly. There are a number of ways to listen to your customers. Most cities that I work with, most successful cities that are out there that have higher customer satisfaction ratings, participation, volunteer participation in advisory committees, and so forth, use surveying. And independent surveying. There are a number of sources for surveys out there. ICMA has a survey, a customer survey that a lot of local governments employ. It's not very expensive, but it really gets to the heart of what the policy and programmatic implications are of the way people in your community are thinking and responding. And these surveys are normally, I don't want to get into statistics, but normally done at least a 95% confidence level, which is tantamount to saying a 5 or 10% level of doubt. So based upon the results of these surveys, it should be able to guide your operating decisions in terms of services, projects, and programs that you're going to put forth. And there's a host of others, and I won't go through these. Everybody's got copies of this. Learning, these are the tools that I was describing. Successful local governments are using 5-year forecasting models, net fiscal impact models to determine whether or not they're successful in economic development, input-output models on a broader scale to look at output earnings and investments, GIS, geographical information systems to position resources, especially in public safety arena, financial trend monitoring system, taking the ratios that the rating agencies look at and create a program whereby if you're moving in the wrong direction, they get red flagged, and then you come up proactively with a way of addressing those. Pro forma financial feasibility studies, those are being used more and more by local governments as they venture into the the business of leveraging their underperforming or non-performing assets with the private sector to accomplish goals and objectives that they otherwise wouldn't be able to accomplish in the near future. Life cycle costing, I meant managed competition program looking at outsourcing services, especially those that are recession sensitive, and the list goes on. Once you have all that data, that gets fed into your strategic planning process. Your strategic plan is a policy plan. It is the plan of the commission, and it provides direction from about 10,000 feet up. And it offers up strategic priorities within which you're going to focus your resources. And staff goes through the calisthenic of saying, okay, here's what we want to do, and which strategic priorities is this going to address, and how will it address it in terms of moving the needle. And within the strategic priority, directional statements. I mean, excellence in education was a strategic priority in one of the cities that I work with for a long period of time, but it used to be combating overcrowding. Today it is creating partnerships to offer local higher education opportunities for our population, and also businesses. Then. A lot of cities grapple with creating a budget based upon a strategic plan because it's very difficult to fund policies. What do those policies mean in terms of programs, tactics, initiatives, capital, and so forth to support those policies? And that's what the business plan does. It essentially operationalizes the strategic plan. Some local governments do it as a separate document. Others do it as part of their strategic plan, which is an implementation plan. Usually strategic plans look out into the future, are reviewed every 2 years, and business plans are implemented and evaluated on a year-by-year basis. And you can see that it's a continuous improvement plan. And there's a lot of the core services that you provide, that are not necessarily addressed. But for a number of core services that could use improvements, what initiatives, programs, projects, and tactics do you put into play to improve those over the next year? And you assign outcomes to that, or expectations. Your budget, therefore, becomes a numerical reflection of your business plan. It includes your capital improvement plan, your capital replacement programs. A lot of cities now have learned an important lesson, and they're funding depreciation. And the rating agencies are expecting the funding of depreciation as well, so that you can equity fund replacement of a lot of your capital, but a lot of operating capital like technology and rolling stock and so forth. And we're in the business of helping local governments issue debt. That's how we get paid. I mean, I'd love to see issue debt, but if you can equity fund, much better solution, oftentimes, with certain exceptions. And then informing what I call the credibility loop. There's many mediums through which you can let your customers know how you're doing and what you're doing and why you're doing it. Newspapers are not the only source. I mean, a lot of cities are creating marketing and communication departments to better inform the customers, residents and businesses, and even visitors about all the good things that are going on, the changes that are being made, and to what extent those achievements are being successful. And oftentimes, if you're informing your residents and they're more aware of what's going on, the next year when you call them and want to do a survey, they're not going to hang up on you. They're going to take the survey, and your success in that endeavor of surveying will be much greater. I know this is a lot of information in a short period of time, but any business model needs to be undergirded by a corporate culture, because it is, in fact, the employees of the organization and management and governance that sets policy and creates the programs and delivers the goods and services to the residents. And culture, as I mentioned earlier, is usually defined by your core values. This is just these are very common core values that I see with local governments throughout the country: customer-focused government leadership, empowering employees usually through cross-functional teams, continuous quality improvements, and integrity. Okay, so where from here? Well, a number of questions I thought I'd just raise. Maybe you can address in a workshop moving forward. But are you doing budget forecasting and of your operating budget? Does your capital improvement program have the operating consequences of those projects, and is that being incorporated into your 5 or 10-year forecast? Understanding what your core business processes are, or more importantly, what are you doing that you don't need to be doing that your customers aren't utilizing or requiring? Who are your customers, and what is it that they want, and how do you know that you're successful? And that comes back to the issue of accountability and measurement. Focusing on customers, what is it about the product or services that is most important to the customer? Is there another way of providing the service? Drilling down and looking at root causes of cost increases, understanding why costs and expenses are going up. Whether you replace or not to replace capital and equipment, you were having that discussion earlier. How do you make that decision? Which tools do you use to objectively determine that answer, or when that tipping point actually occurs? Sharing equipment with other divisions. We see more and more of that. Purchase or lease, contractual services, true cost or all-in cost of providing services. Oftentimes, when you take a look at the cost-benefit analysis, you're not capturing the full cost consequence of your decision. Focusing on process. Where in the organization are you duplicating efforts? A lot of local governments are looking at civilianizing public safety. That's not patrol. Those are things like dispatch, records, and dispatch records. Let me think of another one. Accident investigation and so forth. Not using officers and certainly getting officers out from behind desks and putting them out on the street where they belong. And of course, that goes along with equipping their vehicles with the the technology that they need to have a greater presence and run their business out of their cars. Volunteers, are you using volunteers successfully? Unnecessary steps in routine processes. Looking at scheduling to reduce overtime, focus on outputs and outcomes, benchmarking best practices with other organizations. There's a benchmarking consortium in the state of Florida that a number of local governments are part of, and you can get some good best practice out of that. There's another program out there called Active Strategy. ICMA has a whole list of performance measurements that they've standardized and are being used by local governments throughout the United States that you can compare yourself with. And oftentimes, if you're not getting the same results, you want to know why they're doing better than you're doing, and that leads to best practices from benchmarking. Leveraging non-performing assets. I know you were discussing that today. Do you have a systematic approach for looking at opportunities to either monetize the equity that you have, find a better solution on the operating side, use ground lease agreements or sale leaseback agreements in order to capture additional revenues, oftentimes as a passive investor in and I'm speaking largely of P3 type projects that are occurring. But again, in a built-out community, I mean, you're very wise to be thinking about these opportunities as you move forward, whether it be for a water utility, an airport, or other facilities that you may have that would be appropriate for looking at private sector participation. And a lot of times what cities do is they take a percentage of gross revenues from operations, when they put their land into a deal to accomplish a project that historically they would have built, but the private sector net builds, and they've got better access to capital oftentimes, and better expertise as well. And are you getting the most out of productivity out of your technology? And I talked a little bit about that, refunding debt. And I know that Craig refunded a recent water and sewer deal for you, and that's a good way of saving dollars without cutting services or letting employees go. That's pretty much it. I mean, that's a lot to say in a short period of time, but you've got this information. Jim, if there are any questions, from you or your staff that I can help you, with, we're here. I mean, Dunlap don't just call us when you need money, I mean, call us, when you're looking at process improvements as well, including capital, and better operating techniques.
Mike, I appreciate that, and we have relied on Craig for a long time and utilized his resources well, so we do appreciate the presentation. I don't know if there's any questions.
To undertake something like a strategic planning process, how long does it take? What do you kind of think of as a...
Can you speak in the microphone, Mr. Old? I'm not picking it up.
To undertake a strategic planning process, I mean, how long do you kind of think it would take to undertake it, to reach some conclusions that are usable?
If you're going to use survey techniques and humanize the process by having meetings in certain areas of your community to support that, I can give you an example. Cutler Bay is about the size of Vero Beach. Cutler Bay is south of Miami. Cutler Bay just went through a strategic planning process, and they're now putting a business plan together. That strategic planning process took about 3 months, 4 months.
I would have thought it would take a year and a half, or I would have thought it would take a lot longer. I don't know.
Well, to solicit the input from your customers to determine, what your strategic priorities are and the direction you want to take those, takes a number of workshops and data that you're retrieving. Sometimes, the survey, a lot of these communities, before they do strategic plan, do the survey that I described. The survey, if you have to procure the survey services or use ICMA, if you can, that takes about a month, or so. And but once you have that and you start interpreting the results and determine what those strategic priorities are, I mean, you can do that in a pretty quickly. Doesn't take a long time. The real challenge is then what do you do with it?
Yes.
Yeah.
We have a comp plan that we're working on now. We did a vision plan that I think was finished. Correct me if I'm wrong. Finished in about '07, just in time not to use, and we've not implemented that. And it would be trying to take a comp plan together with a vision plan and a strategic plan and make it all work together. Yeah.
Right. And when you say vision, just to link vision to strategic planning, your vision is, should be defined by your strategic priorities. The sum of your strategic priorities should define the vision, the direction that that you want to take the community. And your mission statement is your objective function. It's the shorter term. Here's what we're going to do now in order to position ourselves to achieve our vision later on. But when I showed you the model earlier, the data input that goes in there includes the comprehensive plan, other land use plans, other mobility plans that may be within. All of those have to be considered. because they all have to be working, as I said, in terms of the characteristics of successful local governments, in harmony, full integration.
Yeah.
Full integration.
Well, great. I appreciate you very much coming.
Sure.
May I,
Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much. It really was eye-opening. Vero Beach is very unique because we have a marina, we have an airport, we're a tourist, we have the beaches, we have an electric system generation, we have water, sewer, and we have solid waste and cemetery and so forth. But we're built out. We are. The city is built out. So there's limited room for expansion. And as a city, which is obviously surrounded by the county is growing, now 139,000 and 140,000. And the city of Vero Beach is 15,000. Yet it's the nexus for, and the magnet for not only the county, but for tourists. And so one of the things is providing services to our customers, which our city residents are a small percentage of what demands are being made on the city. Right. So it just occurred to me when you're saying if you're looking for what your customers want, defining the customers is a first step. Right. In terms of we also have major theaters, we have a major museum, we have 270 acres of parkland, and we have 300 events a year that are managed by the public works, by support for the police and so forth. So all of that above has to go into the mix. I'm just saying that it is, in my private sector, I'll make this short, I did a lot of benchmarking. I worked for AT&T, and we did a comparison of 10,000 different entities on 60 different benchmarks. And it's to try to get them within tolerances of reliability becomes very difficult. And that's one of the problems I think we've been grappling with through the years, is try to find benchmarking, and you can do it individually by departments, but trying to have a synergistic whole that replicates closely is very, very difficult. I just wanted to make those points to try to think through some of the what you have outlined, which really is rich in terms of its of your presentation, but how to then begin to appropriately think through how it applies to us. Thank you.
And you're right on point. And you know, when we were kids, we took math classes, and you solved one equation with one unknown, and you came up with a unique solution, right? But when you got into graduate school, you know, you were solving one equation with several unknowns, and so you were looking for the optimal decision. And the way you find the
decisions,
right,
multiple,
right, and right, and if you know, and there's different dimensions of decision that oftentimes work against one another, and then you've got to find, again, you know, the optimal or the balanced decision. But I think you really need to, first and foremost, you need to take stock in your at-place assets. And what are they doing for you, and what are they doing for your customers, and what's your return on investment, you know, of those assets? Is there a better way to provide that? Are there other sources of revenues that you could achieve, you know, from changing the structure of the provision of those, you know, services, especially those that are real estate based? And in order to better balance your risk and you know, and reward. And a lot of local governments are built out and looking at that right now. I know I was recently up in mentioned Lake Tahoe because you know, 90% of their residents are, are visitors, and I was going to say snowbirds, but that's down here. And so they've done that, and they've come up with plans for their local airport. They've come up with plans for an ice hockey rink facility that they own, and, they're thinking out of the box and changing the way they operate and positioning themselves to get out of the high-risk business of running these facilities, but yet achieve some level of guaranteed income, through a partnership program where they can have a minimum payment, against a percentage of revenues, the greater of the two, so they can budget reliably on the base payment, and anything over and above that is additional revenue that comes in. And I think another aspect of this is when you talk about taking stock in your assets is really to look at your reserves, your unencumbered reserves. Are you using those reserves appropriately? Wall Street will tell you 17% of your general fund, or roughly 30 to 45 days, 60 days for utility in terms of emergency reserves. But what about the rest of it? Over and above that, are you using those reserves most effectively? In your pension plans, you don't want to ever be 100% funded because you're an ongoing, and I'm not editorializing, I'm being, thinking from an economic perspective here, because you're an ongoing operation. The city's not going away, and you can make the argument that if your funded liability is greater than 90%, the opportunity cost of those additional dollars is much greater than where you're putting them. So so you have to think about those ratios and and so forth when you start thinking about how to use those those resources most effectively. Make your balance sheet work for you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Have you known or seen or have an example of a city that when you did the cost benefit analysis
Tim?
of a facility? Have you ever known a city that has done one of these cost benefit analysis on a facility or an activity and then decided to drop it because there was no way to bring that economy of scale up? And,
Yes.
I mean, when you start measuring, the number of customers,
Yeah.
I guess is one of the indicators, but for example, a recreational facility.
I'll give you an example of a recreational facility. Won't say the city, but the city went ahead years ago, and rather than using data, they just used their intuition and anecdotal evidence and said, we're going to build this community pool, a big pool, and we're going to put it next to a regional park that we have. And it's going to be successful. So they went out and hired the lifeguards and, did the whole thing, created a concession stand and whatnot. Supply doesn't create demand. And that pool was a black hole for that community. Cost them a lot of money on an operating basis, only if they asked their residents. Because in this community, everyone has a pool if you live in a single-family home, and if you're part of a multifamily home or a condominium, there's a pool in the condominium. So finally, the city said, "Okay, we're going to go out and we're going to ask our residents what to do with this facility." And you know what they told them? Splash park. So they went out and benchmarked and looked at different splash parks, around Florida and around the country that were successful, and then modeled a plan. To convert this pool into a splash park pool. And especially when in this community, the average age was like 34 or 35 years old, and a good portion of the population were young kids because public schools were good and people moved there, primarily for the public schools. Well, once they built that splash park, they actually, during the summer months, had to have double sessions every day because they were oversubscribed. And all they had to do initially was ask their residents. But that's an example of a recreation. They didn't just pull the pool out, because what were they going to do with it? But they looked to convert it into something better that really didn't cost much money because you already had the infrastructure largely in place there, and it really worked, to their benefit.
But in that example, you realigned your cost. I guess my
Yeah.
question is, have you ever known one that said, we no longer need a football field?
Yeah.
And you walk away from it and sell it or dispose of it? I mean, I understand realigning and trying to fit the customer's needs, but at the same time, you have legacy operations that are very difficult to walk away from. And I guess that's what I'm looking for. Is there a city that, using a football field as an example? But
Yeah, I see with tennis courts, hard surface, not hard true, hard surface macadam tennis courts that are usually built in a lot, and they're not being utilized. Frankly, in this case, because the city built clay courts and other more attractive facilities where they've had the leagues and so forth, these other courts were for open play, but nobody used them, and so they stopped that service. And eventually, they took that property. I mean, and they converted it into roller hockey rinks.
I guess disposal of properties, I guess, is where I was sort of driving to, because as long as it's on your books, you have a cost factor.
Right.
And so, using the business model or example is that if this service is no longer justified from a cost standpoint and from numbers of participants, then how do you dispose of that? And I guess that's, again, I use it as a legacy operations. You have a lot of legacy operations that you maintain and go, and when you say, okay, let's count the number of heads of the customers. We fought this last year in the recreation budget on tennis. How many tennis players do we have, and how many hours do they use, and how much are they willing to pay for tennis? And so that's, and I guess that's one of the challenges. And we belong to the consortium where you do benchmark consortium, and
help start that.
Try to do those, and again, those become a little tricky as well. But it has helped us in formulating a lot of our budgeting process.
And it gives you a pretty good sense of how well you're doing, vis-a-vis other communities, especially of your size and within your region. I mean, you certainly don't want to, in a lot of instances, compare yourself against this, city outside of Chicago,
Right.
because their public works is a lot different than yours. For example, if you're looking. Yeah, I know. I helped start that years ago when I was a city manager.
But it looks like we're doing an awful lot for an awful lot of people, and at some particular time, because we're built out, and because our income is basically going to be fixed, that we're not going to be able to do all those things. We're going to have to be cutting, and so we're going to have to come up against which ones do we get rid of and which ones do we keep, and I think that's in the future.
And that's really where I'm driving to, as to what are the businesses that we're going to be in and the businesses that we're not going to be. Because one of the things that Peter indicated in his discussion is our community that we serve. For example, if you look at where the restaurants are located and the beaches are located and the activities are located, that's within the corporate limits.
Right.
And so the influx, you can go to a city park as an example, go to J.C. Park any weekend, because I go by there every weekend, and the activities that are taking place are not really within the corporate limits. I mean, the demand from within the corporate limits would be very small on that. And the activity is really commuted from the greater community that comes in. And I guess that's really the debate that you have as to trying to put the real business plan in action and tying that to realistic numbers of customers.
And just to your point, there are a lot of cities that during this economic depression just closed facilities down. But now, they've mothballed facilities. Now they see that as a potential asset. So they're now going through the calisthenic of trying to figure out how do we adaptively reuse, those buildings, facilities that we've mothballed.
Right.
I mean, I see, cities that had ownership to malls, for example, that converted them into charter schools. I see, cities that had gymnasiums and closed them down, and now have created visual arts, museums and so forth. It's a different world today, than it was for those 8 or 9, arguably 9 years. Yeah.
Yeah, we get 90,000 people visiting our beaches in a month, and we're a population of 15,000. So I mean, it's a lot of influx from outside.
Excuse me, Peter, for a moment. There's several people here that have. Can you hear me? There's several people that have to move on. I'd like to make a motion to adjourn. Mrs. Turner's okay with it. There's only 3 of us present, so the official meeting's adjourned. I'm not trying to interrupt. I'm just saying.
Right. Just one other point is that when you talk about legacy, this community, when many of these facilities were built and envisioned, had a younger population with a number of children.